Well, good morning. Welcome to day 2 of Faith for Living here at Orchestra Hall. And you're all sitting in the center and near the front, which means you're either eager to learn or you want to get the raffle ticket so that you get the winning prize. So we'll see which it is. I want to remind you that this morning that we have book signing with Dr. Julie Faith Parker at 10 o'clock immediately following this session. And you just go around the corner to the Green Gables, which is right behind us. And they have a table set up at the Women's Club. They're very gracious to host these for us. And so if you've bought a book or you want to get a book, you can get it over at the Fine Print Bookstore and bring it over to Julie, and she will sign it for you. And her book, Eve Isn't Evil, is there, as well as her earlier book that she had with her when she was here before, My So-Called Biblical Life. There's also copies of that at the Fine Print Bookstore. And then we have lunch with the preacher today at 12 noon at Hotel Lakeside, when Julie will be talking more specifically about her book and in more detail. And that lunch we order off the menu, and it's a Dutch treat, but we'll be in the Fern Room, which is the back room of the Hotel Lakeside, and that's at noon. You don't need to sign up, just show up for that. And then this evening is Vespers at 6:45, and today the weather is a bit precarious. I've said before that we need our own weather station at Lakeside because the Toledo weather forecast and the Cleveland weather forecast, neither one are very helpful to us at Lakeside. So we don't know whether it'll be rain or shine. If it is a nice evening, we'll be at the gazebo, which is a very lovely spot at that time of day. If not, we'll be at the Lakeside Methodist Church at 450 Central. And there'll be signs up if we've moved, and it'll also be on the website. And there's a banner on the website where it says rain or change of location due to weather, and it'll say Vespers is moved to Lakeside Methodist Church, if that's the case. And so just want to remind you of those things. And then tomorrow evening is our picnic at Perry Park, and all are invited to that, and to Thursday Catholic Mass at 6:30 at the train station. So we have a lot of things going on this week. And I want to, again, welcome Dr. Julie Faith Parker. She is the biblical scholar in residence at the Marble Collegiate Church in New York City, and also visiting scholar at Union Theological Seminary. And she's married to Reverend Dr. Bill Crawford, who's a Presbyterian minister, and they have 2 grown children. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Julie Faith Parker.
Thank you so much, friends, and thank you so much for being here today. I'm just delighted to see all of you. This afternoon at the lunch, I'm going to be talking a little bit about why I wrote the book and the process of writing the book, so I promise it will be different content from what we've been discussing here. But I realized that yesterday I forgot something really important, and that was that each copy of the book comes with a Tootsie Pop, because you need it for chapter 4. So is my winner from yesterday here? Yes, she is. Okay. Emily, can I ask for your help, please? If you could deliver this Tootsie Pop to the recipient. And today's copy will come with a Tootsie Pop at the end when we get to that part, the raffle. But first, I'd like to call our attention to our topic for today, which is prophecy. And my goal yesterday was to expand our thinking about Eve, with her understanding her as the bringer of knowledge and not someone who is evil, and hopefully using that knowledge to empower our own understanding of ourselves as descendants of Eve. And today my goal is to expand our view of prophecy, and not just to think of it as old men in the Bible. Sure, that's part of it, but it's a much broader conversation, not only in the Bible, but also around us today. So my discussion today is based on research from this chapter, Profit from Prophecy. And I'd like to begin by grounding us in biblical prophecy, and even prophecy more widely in the ancient Near East. So here you see a satellite map of the ancient Near East. This region here, of course, is Mesopotamia. This is the Tigris. This is the Euphrates. Mesopotamia. Meso means middle, like a mezzo soprano. And potamos means river, like a hippopotamus is a river horse. And so Mesopotamia is the land between the two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And because of these rivers, civilization developed here very early because people could irrigate, so they could store crops, and they could start trading, and that led to the development of civilization. And we also have in this prophecy and prophetic texts that have come to us from Mesopotamia. I want you to realize here that prophecy is a widespread tradition, not limited to the Bible. And we know this because from this region of Mesopotamia, and now I'm going to show you some tablets that come from this northern region of Ashur, we have these tablets, lots of tablets, thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of tablets. And these tablets were how people wrote. As you can see, they're written by pressing reeds into clay. And this form of writing is called, anyone know? Oh, beautiful, cuneiform. What's your name? Thank you, Meredith. Dr. Meredith, thank you, Meredith. Cuneiform. Cuneiform is not a language, it's a way of writing. It's by pressing reeds into clay. There was lots of mud or clay on the banks of these rivers. You could just take a reed, snip it. It started out as pictograms, making pictures of different items that people would trade, and over time it became standardized. And these texts are written in Akkadian, which is the name of a cuneiform language that comes from this region here, Akkad, so a little bit down here, although it was also used further north in Assyria. But these texts are written in Akkadian, and these are prophetic texts. And they give messages from the gods or goddesses to human mediators. And the texts were believed to have a timeless relevance. They are usually addressed to kings, and they speak about specific political situations. But what's amazing is that people felt they were worth preserving nonetheless. And so they have lasted for thousands of years, and scholars are able to read these. I studied Akkadian for 1 year. Not as easy as it looks. There was a time when I could read something like this a little bit. I can still make out some, I can make out some of the words, like this word here is God or goddess. That's called a dingir, but scholars have been able, scholars far greater than I, have been able to read these texts and to translate them as Syriologists. And what do they discover? Well, we discover in Mesopotamian divination, there are different ways to understand what the Bible is trying to say, what the gods are trying to say to you. So today, people may or may not believe in gods. Someone may say, I believe in God. Some may say, I don't believe in God. And that's fine. People believe what they want. In the ancient world, everyone believed in gods or goddesses. It would be like saying today, I don't believe in air. Someone said to you, I don't believe in air. Like, how does that work for you? Is that even an option? Of course there's air. That's how people felt about the divinities back then. Everyone believed in the gods and the goddesses. And it was really important to be able to communicate with them because they controlled the world. And so you would seek to be in communication with the divine. And the prophets would help you to do this. And so they would read the stars. So this is a tablet of astrological interpretation. They would also read the sky and make meteorological predictions. This we read about, these are Urim and Thummim. They're kind of like dice. You'd toss them to get an answer, the priest would. And this is heptoscopy. This is the reading of entrails, or here livers. Ectispacy is the reading of bowels. What the priests would do, I tell my students, priests were somewhat akin to butchers because they were the ones who would sacrifice the animals on the altars as an offering to the gods. And they would take the organs of these animals and they would read them to try to interpret messages from the gods. This was another way of that people would divine, that they would be in contact with the divine. We also read about prophecy in Egypt. This is mainly focused on an individual wise person, and sometimes there would be great processions, and then you would make requests when you would have a big procession honoring a god in ancient Egypt. Closer to the land of the Hebrew Bible, we read about prophecy in Syria, just north of ancient Israel, and Palestine, which is the same region. And this one inscription mentions Balaam, who is a professional curser whom we read about in Numbers. This is kind of amazing. We call this extra-biblical evidence. This is when a source from outside the Bible testifies to something that we read inside the Bible. And it happens very rarely. So when scholars find an inscription that's a writing on something hard, either stone or pottery usually, that testifies to something in the Bible, it's a big deal. And this is what they found, this inscription that mentions Balaam. So this is some prophecy that we encounter more widely in the ancient Near East. Let's turn our attention now to the Bible. So the word prophet in Greek, some of you I know have studied Greek, and we've got lots of pastors here, is prophetes in the masculine, but also prophetis in the feminine. I want you to recognize that in Greek, the language of the New Testament, testified in the New Testament, we have both men and women who are called prophets. The masculine and feminine versions of these words appear in the New Testament. And this means one who speaks forth, proclaims, or speaks before. In the Hebrew, the word is navi in the masculine and neviah in the feminine. Also, in the Old Testament, we have both men and women who are referred to as prophets. Interestingly, the Hebrew Bible is somewhat unusual in that you have relatively few women prophets. In Assyrian tablets, I showed you Assyrian, northern Mesopotamia, in those tablets, we actually have more female prophets than male prophets in those Neo-Assyrian tablets, testified in those tablets. So let's talk a little bit about how biblical prophecy works. And so right now, we're going to do a little experiment in biblical prophecy. And I want to ask everyone here, please, to think of a yes-no question that pertains to your own life. And a few volunteers will be invited to share their questions. So I'm just going to give you a moment to think of a yes-no question, like, will I get into seminary? Or, will my child, graduate from high school this year? Any yes-no question you want. Think of any yes-no question, and then I'm going to ask for a couple hands. So I'm going to give you a couple seconds to think. And time's up. Okay. Do I have any volunteers? A volunteer with yes? Oh, good. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Elaine, right? Yes, Elaine. Beautiful. Elaine. So we're going to divine the answer to Elaine's question. I'm going to use a tool of modern divination that's called the Magic 8-Ball. Okay. So Elaine, can you tell, and actually I have a hard time reading it, so I'm going to use my little flashlight here. Okay. Elaine, can you please tell us your question?
Will I leave Ohio before I die?
Will Elaine leave Ohio?
Like move out?
Will she move from Ohio before she dies? Is there a major move in Elaine's future? Let's ask the Magic 8-Ball. Let's see what it says. It says, reply hazy, try again. Okay. So actually, this is a technique within Magic 8-Ball. Never shake it, it gets too bubbly, just swirl. See, I'm a diviner, you have to know the technique. Okay, let's see what it says. It says, look at that. See what it says, Elaine?
It says
Yes.
yes.
It says yes.
Oh, no.
Elaine, looks like the Magic 8-Ball has put a major move into Elaine's future. Anyone else care to try the divining instrument? Oh, good, I've got a volunteer here. Thank you. What's your name?
Shelley.
Shelley, what's your question, please?
Will I live to see my grandchildren graduate from high school?
Will Shelley live to see her grandchildren graduate from high school? Oh, Shelley, look at that. You see it?
Yes.
It says yes. Shelley got a yes. Okay. So you see how the magic 8-ball works. But let's talk a little bit about how this is like biblical prophecy and how this is not like biblical prophecy, because there are some key similarities and some key differences. So first, the similarities. It's like biblical prophecy in that you want to know the answer. Like, what's going to happen? Am I going to have a major move? Am I going to live to see my children graduate from high school? You're eager to find out. That's why you even enter into the process. And if it's good, you hope it's true. And if it's not what you want to hear, you hope it's not true. You might even not want to ask the question because you're a little nervous about what the answer might be. In these ways, this process is like biblical prophecy. And yet, it is not like biblical prophecy in some key ways. First, this is for an individual. And biblical prophecy is usually for a community. It affects more than one person. Biblical prophecy is often also about a cause or something that someone's passionate about. It's frequently related to justice matters. We probably don't place a lot of belief in this magic 8-ball that I bought for $16.99. But we do place a lot of belief in biblical prophecy because it comes from a divine or theological source. And that's what makes it so powerful. So let's talk a little more about who the prophets in the Bible are. Can you name some biblical prophets for me, please? What are some names that come to mind? Jeremiah, beautiful. Who else? Isaiah, beautiful. Who else? Amos, good. Others? Moses, Obadiah. Oh, Obadiah. I love Obadiah. Just one chapter in the entire Bible. Good. Anyone else? Joel, Daniel. Okay, we got too many lots of smart people here. Lots of smart people who know their Bible well. I am not surprised. That is fabulous. But let's talk a little bit about who these prophets are. So we have some prophets that have books named after them. Those are called the writing prophets. But there are lots more prophets in addition to those writing prophets in the Bible. And our early prophets were kind of like superheroes, right? So we have Moses, parts the Red Sea, but he gets this credit for this great dramatic act. It's really something amazing that this prophet does. We also have the story of Elijah. You know the story of Elijah in 1 Kings 18? Fire comes down from heaven with a contest with Baal, right? Very dramatic. You may or may not know the story of Elisha, who brings a child back to life. Jesus does not do it first. Elisha brings a child back to life in 2 Kings 4. And so here we have very dramatic acts that these early prophets do. But we tend to think of but I need to underscore, not every famous person in the Bible is a prophet. My students will say, oh, Ezra was a prophet. No, he wasn't. You know, Samson was a prophet. Not really. You know, so don't think every famous person was a prophet. Not so. Prophets are people who are intermediaries between the divine and the human realm. And the writing prophets are the ones whom we tend to know best. And those were most of the prophets whose names you called out. So the major prophets are Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. Do you know what makes them major prophets? That's it. Long books. Thank you very much, David. Long books. That's it. Not because they were super effective. They just have the longer books. And these are the minor prophets. Many of these names you called out. Daniel is also considered a prophet in Christian tradition, but I'm giving you the tradition of the Hebrew Bible. And this is sometimes called the Book of the 12. And that's because they can all fit onto one scroll, because they are much shorter. We tend to think of the prophets as grown men, but as I say in the book, we discriminate, but the Holy Spirit does not. And so not only do we have women who are called prophets in the Bible, we also have children who act as prophets in the Bible. And we'll talk about them, the women and the children, now. So we have 5 women who are specifically called a neviah, those who have spiritual gifts. There are other women in the Bible who also have these great gifts, For example, in 1 Samuel 28, you may recall the story of the woman of Endor, never called a witch in the text, never called a witch. The woman of Endor, she acts prophetically as a medium, someone who can conjure Samuel. She conjures Samuel from the dead. You may remember that story. But let's talk about the 5 women who are called, specifically called a prophet, with that word I highlighted earlier, Neviah. The first is Miriam, and we read about her in these passages, and she advocates for Moses in the bulrushes, showing great courage. She leads her people across the Red Sea with Moses and Aaron. She is a marker of joy, celebrating the triumph. She's a leader with Aaron and Moses. We read about this in Numbers chapter, here we see 20, but also in chapter 12. And she is remembered in the book of Micah because she leaves a legacy. Miriam is called a prophet. Interestingly, in the book of Exodus, Moses is not called a prophet, and Miriam is. He's called a prophet later in Deuteronomy, but she along with Aaron, is very strong as a prophet. Deborah is a prophet. She judges Israel. She is a very strong and powerful figure. We read about her in Judges 4 and 5. She makes many decisions. She is a military leader. She saves her people. And interestingly, she is extolled as a mother in Israel, even though she has no biological children that are mentioned at all. So it really expands our idea of the great gifts that women can bring as different kinds of mothers, certainly in the Bible. Has anyone ever heard, well, in this crowd you heard of Huldah? Huldah has an amazing story. So she is an advisor to kings. She speaks truth to power. And what's so incredible, so the king Josiah goes to her when he finds a scroll. So King Josiah says, we need to clean out the temple. And he goes and he sends his people to clean out the temple, and they discover this scroll. And they take this scroll to the prophet Huldah, who resides in the second quarter. And what's so stunning about this is she is prophesying at the same time as Jeremiah. And Jeremiah lives not far from Jerusalem at all, in Anatoth. But here, the king goes to Huldah, and she is the one who interprets this scroll. It's really an incredible, incredible story. A lot of people have not heard of her. And then we also have Isaiah's wife. She is not named. Often we find this in the Bible. We have characters who have no names. Sometimes they get stories. Sometimes we have characters who have stories and no names. But she does not have a name, and she doesn't have that much of a story. But she just conceives and bears this child with the very catchy name, Mahar-shalal-hash-baz, which means quicken the booty, spoil the plunder. And so she bears this. What does that mean? Quicken the booty, spoil the plunder. So this is the time when the Assyrians, I showed you them on the map in northern Mesopotamia. I tell my students that the Assyrians were like the Nazis of their day, really skilled at torture and meticulous about documenting it. And so the Assyrians have, at this point, destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel, and the southern kingdom of Judah is remaining. And the King Ahaz here is really worried about it, and the prophets work to give him these signs. Quicken the booty, spoil the plunder. They could mean you're going to get all this booty really quickly, or it could mean you're going to become booty yourselves. So all of the names of these children are sort of double-edged swords. But anyway, she bears this child. Interestingly, in Isaiah 5, you may know the song of the vineyard. Let me sing a song of my beloved. He planted a vineyard. It's in a woman's voice. Is it possible that this woman called a prophet who was in the Isaiah school wrote it? We don't know, but we do have prophetic words in a woman's voice just 3 chapters prior to the introduction of this woman prophet. It's a nice possibility I like to keep open. And then finally, here we have Noadiah. This is a great example of a woman, a prophet, a person in the Bible for whom we have a name but no story. We know nothing about her except this verse, that she's called a prophet and that she intimidates Nehemiah. Nehemiah, as you recall, was the governor of Jerusalem when they seek to rebuild it after it's been destroyed. And he's pretty powerful, but he's afraid of her. So that's kind of interesting. And that's all we know about her. That and that she's called a prophet. But let's talk also about children, because children can be prophets too, and children are prophets in the Bible. And in the book, I have this chapter 10 is a series of academic excursions, like some deep dives into some questions. And most of my research, most of my publication have been on children in the Bible. And so I couldn't leave that out of this book. So I have this section, this academic excursus, children can be prophets too. And in this, it's just like two, 3 pages. I look at some children who are also prophets in the Bible. And one of them is Samuel. We're not going to read this whole text, but you can see here he's at the shrine at Shiloh with Eli. And Hannah, his mother, as you may recall the story, had a hard time conceiving him. And so she said, if I have this child, I will dedicate him to the Lord. And after he's weaned, she brings him to this shrine at Shiloh. And there he is raised by the priest Eli. And then the voice of God comes to him in the night. And the voice of God comes to him repeatedly, repeatedly. And he keeps thinking that it's Eli calling him. But he keeps going to Eli, here I am, here I am. And then Eli finally says to him, look at verse 9, go lie down. If he calls you, shall say, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. And he says, Samuel, Samuel, speak, for your servant is listening. If you go on to read this story, the voice then tells Samuel of a horrible thing he must do, which is to tell Eli how the doom of his own sons. And he does it. Very difficult thing for anyone to do, especially a child. But he steps up into his prophetic role. And look at what he says here in verse 4. Here I am. That is the classic prophetic utterance. Here I am, Lord. Here I am in Hebrew, hineni. Repeat it after me, hineni. And it literally means, behold me, or like immediacy, me. And that's what the prophets say. Here I am, Lord. And that's what Samuel says here. Another story is that of Jeremiah. You know this. He is called in the womb. Before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you prophets to all nations. And he says in Hebrew, Adonai, lo yedati debar, ki na'ach anochi, because I am only a child. Does God accept that excuse? No, God does not. Don't say, oh, you're just a child. Don't think you can't do it because you're a child. I've called you. I'm going to be with you. You're going to be fine. Let's get busy. And indeed, that's what happens with Jeremiah. God puts the words in his mouth, and look what you're going to do over nations and kingdoms to pull down, pluck up, pull down, destroy, overthrow, build, and plant. So it's not going to be easy, but he is given this prophetic task. And indeed, Jeremiah accepts it, because what choice does he have? And then I'd also like to point out this little girl. This is the Israelite slave girl. And she is a character whom childist is like feminist, looking at the children with an eye to reassess their roles and importance, just as feminist scholars have done with the women. So childist, C-H-I-L-D-I-S-T. It's a new field, but you can Google it, it's a thing. Childist biblical scholars point out this little girl, because in 2 Kings 5, she is the only girl called little in the entire Old Testament who speaks. The only little girl in the entire Old Testament who speaks. And she is a girl who's been captured. She's from Aram, which is north of Israel. Raiders come, they take her, they bring her down into Israel, and there she's serving Naaman's wife. This is in the lectionary. You may have heard this story. And she's serving Naaman's wife, and she says, the master of the household, this great commander, Naaman, has leprosy. She says, oh, that my Lord, if only my Lord were with the prophet in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. And indeed, eventually Naaman goes to Samaria, and he meets with the prophet Elisha through a messenger. He follows the prophet's instructions, and he's cured of his leprosy. But the whole miracle takes place because of the words of this little girl. And while she is not a prophet herself, I suggest that she is somewhat like John the Baptist. She points to the work of a prophet who is much greater than she is. She knows of this person who can harness these powers, who has these great divine powers, and she sends Naaman to Elisha, and the great prophet, and indeed he is cured. And then, of course, who's the most famous child prophet in the Bible? There we go. Thank you very much. Thank you so very much, Janet. Jesus, right? Okay, we first meet Jesus as a baby, and we first know of his spiritual gifts as a child. When Jesus first speaks as a child in Luke 2, there in the temple, and he has great healing powers when he acts basically as a shaman. So let's talk about that a little bit, all the different ways that prophecy takes place. So I've been talking about prophecy in the ancient world. We've talked about it in the ancient Near East broadly. We've talked about it in the Bible, especially the Hebrew Bible, which is my area. And now I'd like to talk about it beyond the Bible, because prophecy is a widespread phenomenon. It is not limited to long ago and far away. You may be a prophet, or someone you know may have prophetic gifts. So let's talk about the different roles that prophets perform. And this is based on anthropological studies. Here I'm drawing on the work of Robert Wilson. So as you'll notice as we'll go through these, there's a lot of overlap. It's not very clearly delineated categories. It's kind of fuzzy, it's sort of loose, and you can think about how many of these different roles Jesus would take on. So a priest performs a public cultic function. The preacher speaks messages from God. A medium is this bridge between the living and spiritual. A necromancer is a form of a medium, really speaking to those who are dead. That's what we read about in 1 Samuel 28, the woman of Endor. A diviner, extra insight into the divine. A seer can predict the future, also has visions like Amos. A mystic is devoted to these otherworldly practices. A shaman can tap into the power of another world and harness it. And a wonder worker can perform miracles. Jesus really acts as a shaman in many ways. Elisha is a shaman and also a wonder worker. They're really pretty, a shaman's kind of like a subcategory of a wonder worker. A shaman is some person who acts kind of like a funnel. It's like you take this divine energy and you funnel it through yourself, and then you can direct it in a certain way, usually for healing, but shamans can also use their power for ill. And we have prophets all around the world today, and even children who are prophets today. Just let me point out two to you. So Greta Thunberg, we might easily call a prophet today. She speaks out with passion about a cause. And Malala Yousafzai, she, of course, as you know, was from Afghanistan, spoke about education for children. Prophets function in many ways. All around the world, here we go. Just think of these different forms that prophets can take all around the world, but also around our world, and I'll get to that in a moment. But first, I'd like to show you this brief video, and this is of an African shaman levitating. And I want you to watch this. It's 2 minutes, and then I want you to tell me, please, no right or wrong answer, whether or not you think this is a hoax. Do you think this is rigged, or you think what you're seeing in this video actually happened? So here we go.
There are other paranormal phenomena which are even documented in the Bible, which defy the forces of gravity. This man, whose name is Ovaku, is an African shaman, and here we can see him preparing himself for a levitation. This will take place as soon as darkness begins to fall. The images which this film has recorded are scarcely to be credited. There are no hidden supports or pulleys to be seen. In spite of this, Ovaku actually rises off the ground, and it seems as though he is floating on a cushion of air. The German commentator cannot believe his eyes. There is no question that this is a trick or an illusion, and he's absolutely convinced that he's witnessing a miraculous event, and that the film is incontrovertible proof that levitation is indeed possible. A second cameraman can now be seen hurrying to the side so that he can get close-up pictures of the fascinating event. Could it be that there are in fact invisible fields of force which this shaman is able to take advantage of? The shaman's breathing has become unusually fast, and his face is contorted with the effort of the undertaking. Could the technique which we are witnessing here be the very same technique which is said to be practiced in India and in Tibet? Ovaku then suddenly drops back down to the ground like a stone. It seems as though the very same field of force which appeared to hold him up in the air has now been totally used up. The shaman is completely exhausted.
Okay. I'll get to that in a moment. What do you think? How many people here think that video is a hoax? Okay. There we go. There's hands up, hands high, hands high. Have the video hoax, okay? How many people believe that this was actually a shaman levitating? Okay, okay. This is usually what I encounter. Most people are like, no, I don't think so. You know, what I've heard a lot from my students is it's dark, there could be pulleys in the background, the narrator is trying too much to control your thinking, all of these things. And I have had other students. I had this student from Africa who said to me, I have seen shamans stop bullets. I totally believe that video. So it really depends. But I tell my students, I'm telling you, we in the modern Western world have these post-Enlightenment blinders on where something doesn't exist if it's not scientific and rational. This is our post-Enlightenment legacy. When we read the Bible, we need to loosen those blinders and try to take them off because we are not in a post-Enlightenment world. Because there are all kinds of miracles that happen in the Bible, right? Jesus takes 5 loaves, 2 fishes, feeds 5,000 people. All kinds of miracles, you know, he raises Lazarus from the dead. We could go on that we believe happened. People believe that they happened in the Bible. Why can't such miracles happen now? Well, you might say it's all Jesus, and that's maybe true, but it's beyond Jesus even in the Bible. And perhaps these powers, or some of these powers, are even around us today. And I'd like to tell you about some prophets whom I have known. And one of them is my father. And I first came to this realization, and this is what I do in the book, some very personal stories and a lot of academic knowledge. And I share this story in the book, is relating it to the Bible. So my family, my husband, Reverend Dr. Bill Crawford there, a handsome guy sitting there, he was senior pastor of the Larchmont Avenue Church, and this is the lovely manse in which we lived. So this was our room, and when my mother died very suddenly at age 71 years old of a heart attack, my dad, who was a World War II veteran and wasn't so used to taking care of himself, came to live with us for 5.5 years. And so he moved into this room that had been the guest room, and this was the wall between our rooms. And we had to move the furniture. His bed was here, our bed had been here. We had to move it to over here because he kept talking in the middle of the night. Here's a picture of my dad. And David Parker, God rest his soul. And he would say, in the middle of the night, "Here I am, Lord. Here I am, Lord." And we would hear this all the time. And he was a preacher, and he was also a poet. And he would write songs giving praise to God that his congregations would sing. And that's what a lot of the prophecy books in the Bible are. Flip through them, a lot of white space. They're poetry. And poetry, you know this from the Psalms. Poetry was often songs first. But he would speak very much filled with God's Spirit. And I thought, wow, I'm living with a prophet. Let me tell you about a few others whom I have known. This is my friend Wanda. We went out to lunch one day. I'm about to have that chocolate mousse. It was really delicious. And she's having that glazed pear. And she was telling me over lunch about how she would get visions. She would get visions about what was going to happen. And then about 4 or 5 months later, the vision would play out. And she would see before her eyes happen what she had had a vision of months earlier. And she told me, it freaked me out. She said, I didn't like this at all. And so I prayed to God, to Jesus. She said, I prayed to Jesus to take that gift away. She said, and Jesus did take that gift away. And I've not received visions since. Another prophet whom I've known is this woman. Her name, of course, I share all this with their permission. This woman named Kathy Boland. She was my student at Trinity Lutheran Seminary. And she told me this story about how she was once at a 4th of July celebration. And there are lots of people in a park, very crowded. And all of a sudden, these kids started throwing firecrackers into the crowd. And it was very scary because they're all sort of packed in there and there's no place to go. And so she just started praying. And she said, I prayed, God, please help us. And she said, I got a very clear answer. And God said, I am helping you. Look up. And she looked up and she said she saw these large people with long hair and these wings beating back the firecrackers. And she said, I know what I saw, and no one was hurt that day. Then the other story, I'm not going to tell you now. I'm going to tell you at the book club, if you have book discussion, if you come today. But you can keep this image in mind. This is a friend of mine, Alexandra LeClaire, who supports herself as a medium. And she told me something in 2015 that led to my writing of this book. And I will tell you about that, should you be able to join me for lunch at 12 o'clock today. But the reason I share these stories with you is this is what a prophet looks like today. And I hope you will consider this, what prophetic gifts you might have, or what you might see in terms of prophecy when you look in the mirror. Reflect on your own prophetic gifts and claim them. Use them in God's service and notice how God helps you and encourages you. There are a few techniques I'm going to put forward to you. Notice and appreciate the work of the Holy Spirit. Be aware when something happens in your life that you say, wow, what an amazing coincidence. Pay attention to the little voice inside you that urges you to do something or not to do something. Pay attention also to the signals that you get from your body when you're in some sort of situation. Your body does not lie. And pray to increase your connection to God. We tend to think of prophets as biblical. And of course, we find many prophets whose words we love and cherish in these texts that come from long ago and far away. But we can also find prophets around us when we meet someone or know someone or hear of someone who's passionate about a cause and speaks out for the good of all. We can also find prophets around us when we notice the gifts that lead a person, anyone, to deliver messages from God. We can also find prophets around us when we look a little more closely at people whom we know, or even ourselves. How are we empowered to act on God's behalf? Notice prophets, not only from ancient times, there and then, long ago and far away, but also prophets that are around us, right here and even now. Thank you, my friends. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask Emily to please make sure. I want a hand of anyone who hasn't gotten a raffle ticket. If Emily, okay, Emily, can I ask for your help, please, bringing these tickets around? If you would, let's make sure everybody gets one. And while we're waiting for that, we'll start with the questions and answers, and then we'll have our drawing. So first, Emily, if you wouldn't mind helping with the tickets. Do we have a question? Any questions? Okay. Great.
Hey, Julie. Am I on? Yes.
Hey, Pamela.
So I think that we live in an age where there are a lot of, I feel like, false prophets. Do you have a test for that? I mean,
Oh,
what is your...
what a great question. Yes, that's a really great question. So how do we tell a false prophet from a real prophet, So the book of Deuteronomy has an answer